Today I'm going to be talking about wooden agency in Balinese music and dance. Not particularly wooden instruments, but the way wood itself is an active agent, an active contributor to Balinese music in both symbolic and non-symbolic ways. So let's start by watching a short video of Balinese music, so you can see what I will be talking about. Okay, that clip you just saw was Balinese music played on a Gamelan Orchestra. And now here we can see a picture of the instruments of the Gamelan Orchestra itself. The interesting thing I want to point out right away is that it's not a wooden ensemble. Most of, or not all, but many of the instruments are classified as metallophones, xylophones, gongs. You can see some big hanging gongs in the background, and a row of small gong chimes towards the back of the ensemble. The drums, too, are made out of wood, but they're played with skins. So there's not actually very much wooden sound in Balinese music. It's all either skins or flutes or bronze instruments. So it turns out that you're most likely to encounter what we might call wooden music or sound made on wooden things in traditional ceremonial cooking, when a group of relatives from a village get together and chop spices for ceremonial gatherings. I'm sorry I don't have a recording of this, but it's a really amazing sound when you hear dozens of people chopping on wooden cutting boards. And in fact, the word for gathering to make food is mobat, which refers to the sound of the chopping, not the food itself. But still, going back to the picture, there's a lot of wood in Balinese instruments. The frames, the elaborately carved cases of most of the instruments are made from wood, usually either teak or jackfruit. But still, I think there's something more to it. And what I want to argue in this presentation is that wood is actually a very foundational part of the construction of Balinese music. It's not just there to support the metal frames or to hold the skins of the wooden drums, but actually act as something more. So to do that first, I'm going to look at the relationship between nature and culture. So nature and culture, at least for most of us, is something very taken for granted. We have this idea that there's a natural world out there, which we can talk about in terms of natural science, a very objective reality. And then there's culture, which is what we do with nature. And culture becomes something very symbolic when we talk about humans joining together. What happens a lot of time is that the actual objective properties of things stop mattering. And what starts to matter is what humans do with things. But this is just one way of approaching our existence. And a lot of recent scholarship has looked at the ways that different cultures or different societies don't just relate to nature and culture in different ways, but they have very different definitions of what nature and culture might be, even if they distinguish between the two. So with that, We can talk about our specifically Western relationship between nature and culture, which essentially is a way of being where cultural form is imposed on inert matter. Some people have called that hylomorphic, which comes from the Greek words hyl and morph, which means form and matter. But the issue with this, as we've seen in a lot of presentations today, and I'm sure we will for the rest of the day, is that if nature is a completely inert source for raw materials, you can do anything you want to it in the name of culture. And that is one of the biggest issues with our environmental crises, it's not just the fact that the Western culture doesn't respect some kind of objective nature out there, like other cultures might do, but to have Western culture, we need to ignore any life that might be in nature. It's just a raw material for us to do whatever we want, and our own abilities to turn things symbolic works in our favor. If the important thing about our lives are the meanings it has for us, who really cares about what the actual nature is? Because it's just a completely secondary foundation for whatever we do with it. But there are some alternative models that present themselves. And it turns out that our taken for granted relationship between nature and culture does not really hold up under scrutiny. And scholars in many fields for the last 20 or 30 years now have been poking holes in the separation of subjective and objective realities. But the interesting thing is that you don't need to be a scholar or a really polemical writer to realize this. I think all woodworkers know this as well. Because when you start to make something out of what you might even call an inert piece of wood, it talks back. And all woodworkers know you have to follow the grain, right? You have to listen to the wood to tell you what it wants to do. And that's a very different approach than having a set form in your head and realizing it in the real world. Because whenever you try to do that, if you really try to impose your own will on the thing you're working with, bad things are going to happen. And I think in woodworking, the best example of this is in wood turning. I don't know if there are any wood turners here, but the fact of spinning a piece of wood at high speeds and sticking sharp objects into it, if you're not paying attention to the actual grain and shape of the wood, and you just try to do whatever you want, that really bad things are going to happen. And the wood will tell you if you've upset it, sometimes by flying off the machine and smacking you in the face. So there's something else to it, and there is a line of scholarship starting with people like Gregory Bateson and continuing to the current day with Lambros Malaforis, who call that attitude the anthropocentric, which means human-centered, I did it attitude, which means whatever a human creates, they take all the authorship for it. The human is the sole author of whatever they've done. But like I've started to explain, there's also all sorts of other agencies and contributions from things like, for example, the materials being worked with, but other cultures have other ideas. There could be spirits that are contributing, other things that are kind of outside the objective existence of the Western model of nature and culture. So Bali is one of those places that has a very different idea. And Balinese woodworkers know that whatever they make, whatever they create, the wood they used, or what you would say they used, has an equal part in its creation. Which is why trees are very respected. It's kind of hard to see, but this is a very large banyan tree, which has a shrine placed in front of it. And here's a slightly different picture. It's even larger, but in many cases the Balinese wrap these sashes around the trees to show their respect for them. And one way that this manifests in Balinese music and dance is in the creation of these very, very elaborately carved lifelike dance masks. So when the wood carver goes to make a mask, he doesn't just buy a piece of wood at the lumber yard. He doesn't just chop down a tree, but he asks the tree's permission to take a piece of it. And these masks, which are very sacred, and I'll talk about that in a moment, they come from a certain tree called the kapuh tree, or sometimes pule. I'm sorry, I don't know the Latin name, but they only grow in graveyards, at least in Bali. And they're cut from the living wood. When it's time to make a mask, the mask maker sits down in front of the tree and formally asks for its permission and finally cuts a small amount, which, with much ritual ceremony, he will finally turn into a mask. So here's another picture of a mask maker painting the mask, and you can see, it's a little dark, but hopefully you can see the relationship between mask maker and mask. They're both looking at each other. The mask maker is not just imposing his will on inert materials, but he's making something in collaboration with the wood itself. And these masks then take on very, very important roles in the spiritual life of Balinese villages, kind of epitomized in this relationship between the one on the left called the Barong and the one on the right called Rangda. And these are the two protector spirits of each village. And they represent good and evil, and they're engaged in this constant, never-ending fight that, in Balinese beliefs, has no end. Good and evil constantly fight in a circle. So let's watch a short video of the actual dance drama that uses these two masks, and we can see the way that they'll come alive. And I want you to wonder if it's just the dancer inside the mask bringing it to life, or maybe there's something else that comes from the materials, from the spirits, whatever other entities might contribute to this resulting dance drama. One other very important role in the creation or construction of Balinese music that I haven't talked about yet, and that's in the actual conceptualization of how the different parts of a Balinese Gamelan Orchestra fit together, how the different instruments make music together. So in this picture, which I showed before, there's a number of instruments, and these all have different names, many different kinds of instruments, but the way the Balinese organize them is not by their shape or what kind of sounds they make or maybe what a material produces the sound, but the role they have in the Balinese ensemble. So it turns out that the master metaphor is one of a tree. And we see this very, very obviously in Balinese music that any Balinese song, any gamelan song has roots in the gong cycle. So the gong instruments provide a cyclical structure that everything else is built on. The gongs also move the slowest out of all the instruments, and we'll see as the tree grows and as the music is built up, the parts will get higher and higher in pitch and faster in rhythm. So above the roots is the trunk of the tree, which is provided by the core melodic instruments. that also play a repetitive cycle, but it's one that needs to be elaborated on. So the leaves, or what they actually call flowers, which still works because there are flowers on trees, is the elaboration or ornamentation of the melody. So let's hear what that sounds like. So in this example I'm going to play, we'll hear the instruments brought in one by one. So we're going to start with the roots, which is the gong cycle and a timekeeper, and then we'll hear the trunk grow out of that in the core melodic instruments, and then finally all the elaboration will kick in. And it's very sudden in this particular example I have. So you'll know when you hear that, and then we'll backtrack and talk a little bit about how that elaboration actually comes together and how it has that same metaphor of different people working together in mutual authorship of the music that results. Let's hear what that sounds like. So here's the timekeeper. And now we can hear the gongs, which are the roots of the piece. So now the melody that just entered is the trunk of the tree. It's what's called pokok, or trunk, and it's what everything else, all the elaboration, everything you'll hear later is based on. And here's one simple example of a melodic ornamentation. But in a moment, all the ornamenting parts will kick in, and it'll be a very different experience. We're still in the trunk of the tree. This is the melodic foundation for everything else. Now here it comes. Okay, so that was a tree conceptualized through Balinese music. So the last thing I want to talk about, I want to revisit the idea I introduced before that in Balinese woodworking and mask making, it's not a single authored product, that there's multiple roles that go into the creation of a single thing. And that same idea carries through in the paired nature of Balinese music. So here's another picture of a Balinese gamelan ensemble. And I realize it's not very clear through the projection, but that's part of the point. I picked this picture because it's kind of hard to tell where the human bodies stop and the instruments begin. Just like the instruments are ornately carved and gilded, so are the performers wearing these costumes. They're supposed to blend in and become one thing. So the idea that you can't make music or really anything by yourself carries through in especially the ornamenting and elaborating parts in Balinese music. You literally can't play Balinese music by yourself. You need a partner helping you because a lot of the time the parts are just too fast to play by yourself. Also, the instruments are built in pairs and the tuning of the sets are different so that in each pair of instruments, each key that's supposed to be the same note is actually detuned slightly So you get this sound called ombak, or waves. It actually sounds like there's vibrato added. So let's listen to that for a moment. So here's one of the pair. And then the other one will come in. There it is. It's slightly different. Then they'll play them together. And there's the soul of Balinese music in that duality. The idea that you just can't do it yourself. No matter how hard you try, you need a partner. So that also carries through in the ornamenting parts, which are played very fast. So you just need a partner in order to be able to play fast enough to keep up with everything else. So let's hear how that comes out. In this example, the musicians will play one of the parts, and then they'll switch to the other one, and then finally we'll hear how they fit together. Now here's the other one. And there they are together. All right. So I'm out of time. So I want to leave it there and just point out that, so in this presentation, I've introduced two ways that wood really has an agential presence in Balinese music. As a collaborator in the creation of the wooden parts of the ensemble, and also as a symbolic entity that helps the musicians to conceptualize the entire structure of Balinese music. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.